And welcome, everyone. It's so lovely to have you all here. I really appreciate your time. I know it's precious, so thank you for showing up. And I can see now I'm getting to know some of the names, so I can see some familiar people as well. So thank you for coming back. So we're going to try our best to get through as much material as we can on habits today. It's a massive topic, really fascinating, really interesting. So I hope that it's useful. So let's get started. Most of you maybe have seen me now before, but as Sally said, I'm a life coach, a wellness coach. I host retreats. I do all kinds of educational stuff on wellness, and I do lots of corporate wellness activities as well. So we'll not spend too much time on that. Let's jump into what we're going to talk about today. So, what is a habit and why habits are crucial for success? We're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of habits, the role of identity, how to change habits and why this can sometimes be difficult, and then the more practical side of how to apply some of this theory to your life and your business as well. So I want to start by introducing this concept from James Clear, who I will reference at times during the session. So this is from his best-selling book, Atomic Habits, which I'm sure pretty much all of you will have heard of or at least have heard of. I see some nodding, so that's good. I mean, it's a big, massive bestseller, huge, and really quite a remarkable book on habits. There's been lots of people that's come before James Clear, but he's wrapped it all up in this really beautifully easy to understand way. So we'll talk about some of his theories as we go through, but in case I forget later, I would very much recommend the book if you haven't already read it. So he says that the quality of your life will depend on the quality of your habits. And I think it's such a big statement, isn't it? Habits, maybe for some people, are more important than they have realized. And so there's a lot to unpack when we are considering the impact of your habits on your life and work. So let's explore this a little bit more together. So, as we're focused on habits today, I want you to think about it a little bit differently because the demands of daily life can easily overshadow the importance of spending a little bit of time considering where you're at. And I'm really hopeful that that's what these sessions are giving you, just a little bit of time to stop and consider, where am I at? Where am I going next? And how am I going to get there? So I want you to spend just some time here thinking about what's next for you. Now, this can be personal or professional. You can use this content in whatever way suits you. But I want you to start thinking about your habits now as foundational pillars. They're foundational pillars that determine your physical, your mental health, your emotional health, as well as your overall success. However you define that for yourself, obviously, is up to you to decide, but your habits really need deliberate focus and attention and often. And I think that's something that doesn't happen enough because, we're focused on goals and daily life and challenges and all these different things. But actually, to sit down and think about, okay, I'm going to think about my habits, I'm going to consider them, I'm going to make some deliberate changes. That's a really powerful place to be. Essentially, you are empowering yourself to take that next step forward with deliberate action. Because if life is like anything like this year, it was January a second ago and now it's June, and where has the time gone? So I'm like, oh my God, if you don't take this deliberate time to think about it, time just goes and you're like, how was that a year ago that I qualified, for example? And then you're like, wow, I really need to get moving. I have all these ideas, I've got goals, I want them to, be successful. But it's trying to translate that into everyday life. It's easier said than done. I can see some of you nodding so that I know that you get it. So let's take a moment and share where we're at. So let's have a think about this. What's one habit that you wish you could stick to? So I'm going to give you some little reflection exercises as we go through because I want this to be really practical and useful for you. So what's one habit you wish you could stick to? I encourage you to scribble it down. You know, I'm always a fan of scribbling notes and any little inspirations that come to mind as we're talking. Oh, consistency, that's a good one. Writing a blog, social media posts, yeah. Exercise. Don't worry, Lisa, welcome. Exercise and health plan, improving myself. Yeah. Hydration, that's a really important one. Pinterest posting. My God, there's so many things, isn't there? There's so many things that we think we should be doing. Um, it's impossible to keep up sometimes. So yeah, it's just interesting to write this down. And as always, it's just creating this starting point for ourselves. Yeah, and doing the most important things for my business first thing in the morning. Yeah, that's a great one. Putting myself first, Cassia, yes. Okay, so the second part of this kind of reflection time is slightly different to the questions that I've been asking you on the previous session. So this one is, how would you describe your potential? So slightly different. How would you describe your potential? Now, this is different to what we were talking about before. You know, how would you describe yourself? If you describe your potential, you're kind of disassociating from yourself just a little bit. And I want you to really think about, first of all, if you're stuck, that's okay. Just allow yourself to think about it. You know, it might come to you later. But I want you to consider what it feels like. What does your potential feel like? And if you were to describe that, what would come up? Louisa, I love that. Limitless, anything is possible. Hindered, yeah, and everybody's so different. I have potential, I'm a bit stuck and limited. Yeah, unknown, that's interesting, Alison. And think about that as you just maybe haven't tapped into the power of that yet. Fiona, huge, creative, empty and lost. And you can see even, you know, having the space to see where other people are at is really quite incredible. So the reason I'm asking you this is because I want you to consider yourself slightly differently just to what we've been asking before. Because if you feel like limitless, like somebody said, you know, it's going to be easier for you to tap into these behaviors that are going to take you forward. And you have to meet yourself where you're at. You know, all of you don't have to be feeling, you know, like your potential is massive and global and all of these things. You know, start where you're at and get really clear. Everything starts with clarity and awareness and, you know, this kind of idea of I know where I'm at and I'm okay to move forward from here. So let's move forward into what is a habit. So a habit is a regular practice or routine that is usually performed automatically, often without conscious thought. So it's an acquired behavior pattern regularly followed until it has become involuntary. So it just kind of happens automatically. So habits can be physical, like things like brushing your teeth, and also mental things like thinking positively or negatively in certain situations. So habits will usually emerge through repetition and reinforcement, and they can be really difficult to break. The other thing about habits is they can be really beneficial, like, you know, exercise or reading or social media for your business. They can be neutral, you know, you might have a habit of clicking your pen, something like that, or they can be detrimental or negative, things like smoking, overeating, you know, that kind of thing. So Wendy Wood, I'll also reference a little bit as we go through. She is one of the world's leading researchers on habit science. So her work kind of bridges the academic side and practical application, especially around how much of our behavior is driven by our automatic actions rather than our conscious brain. She's the author of Good Habits, Bad Habits. So if you want to look that up as well, I'd recommend that. A couple of her key theories are from her research, she says about 43% of daily actions are habitual, not intentional. And she also says that willpower is really overrated. Habits rely on context and repetition. So, the psychology of habit formation. So, there's so much work that's been done on habits. And essentially what, you know, scientists are trying to understand is why we do what we do and why it's so difficult to snap out of behaviors that we consciously know are maybe not so positive for us and how to change that behavior. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an outline of some of the key thought leaders in this space. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about each one because that would be a whole session, but I'll give you the general gist. So the habit loop, which we are going to look at next, because I think that's important for you from a practical side. So Charles Duhigg. So this is cue, craving, response, reward, and we're going to look at this model next, so don't worry about that. But understanding this loop is really important to help you disrupt unhelpful behaviors and help you to build new ones. So basically, what I believe from personal experience is that noticing your own habit loop means you are tuned into your awareness a little bit more, and therefore you're more in control. So we're going to look at that in a wee second. I also wanted to mention the work of B.F. Skinner. So any of you who are in this kind of psychology world will know that he was a psychologist and he is responsible for developing this kind of theory of operant conditioning. So this was back in the 30s. So this is the idea that behavior is shaped by consequences. So he discovered that actions followed by positive outcomes, rewards, are more likely to be repeated, and those that are followed by negative outcomes, punishments, are less likely to reoccur. So this became one of the really important foundations to understand how habits form. So in this context of what we're talking about today, Skinner's work showed us that rewards reinforce behavior, meaning that we're far more likely to repeat an action if it feels good or if it's satisfying or rewarding. So his research and his work was really important because it laid the groundwork for modern habit psychology, if you like, by highlighting really that change doesn't happen through willpower, it happens through consistent reinforcement. So then we move on to automaticity by Dr. Wendy Wood. So she's a leading researcher in habit science, and she highlights that many of our actions happen without deliberate thought, especially when repeated in the same context. So she talks a lot about the importance of environment as well. So rather than relying on willpower or motivation, she kind of emphasizes the importance of, shaping where you are, shaping your environment to make positive habits more automatic. So her research reminds us that lasting change comes from not trying harder necessarily, but from designing spaces and routines and maybe a daily plan of action that make the behaviors we want easier to repeat so that you get to a point where they run on autopilot. Then you've got James Clear. So he has made the science of behavior change really accessible. I think that's his big achievement. His work centers on the idea that small, consistent habits compound over time to create really powerful results. He also popularized the concept of identity, and we're going to talk a little bit about this because it's so crucially important as well. This is the idea that when real change happens, when we focus on not the goal or what we want to achieve, but on who we want to become. And we're going to come back to this because it's really, really, it's so powerful. And I think, especially talking about James Clear, I think his message is especially powerful for anyone in business because it means that change doesn't require perfection. You don't have to get it right all the time. It means that success may come from consistency and a very clear sense of who you are as a person. So, in line with this, consider your habits as actions for the type of woman and maybe entrepreneur that you want to become. So we'll look at this in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. And I just wanted to also mention Dr. BJ Fogg because he was the author of Tiny Habits, which was a big foundation, for example, on the work that James Clear then followed up with that. But he took a lot of the Dr. Fogg principles. So his research really shows that habits don't form through pressure or willpower, but by starting really tiny, feeling success really quickly, and using well-placed prompts again in your environment. So it's bringing all of these things together. And his approach also is really empowering for entrepreneurs because it means that meaningful change can just start with, a minute a day. His model teaches us that success isn't necessarily about doing more, but again, it's this idea of designing habits that feel good and fit into your lifestyle and what's actually possible. So let's move on to this kind of science of habit formation because this habit loop really helped me when I was researching this topic and also just in my own personal experience of building new healthier habits. So this is the backbone essentially of every habit, and it is not positive or negative. Think about this as just neutral. So you've got your cue, your craving, your response, and your reward. So, for example, if you feel overwhelmed, that might be your cue. If you crave relief from this kind of feeling, that's your craving. You might scroll through social media as a response. And then you might feel temporarily distracted, temporarily better. This is your reward. Now, this reinforces the loop. So when that loop closes, the habit is reinforced. It makes it more automatic. So in a sense, you're getting a reward from that kind of soothing feeling of distracting yourself temporarily. So what I really believe about this model is the key to changing or creating habits is to become more aware of your cues and your rewards. So, how are you rewarding yourself? Knowing that it might be positive, might be negative, might be neutral. So, your brain isn't thinking, oh, this is a positive thing, so I must reinforce it. It's happening automatically. So, you have to try and kind of figure out what are my cues. So, a very normal life kind of example of this would be, if you've got a biscuit tin, like we did in our house growing up, you go into the kitchen, you see the biscuit tin, you want a biscuit. If that's not there, you're probably not going to think about it because that's your visual stimulus, that's your cue. It could be the same for if you open the cupboard and what is at eye level? Is it healthy things that make you want to, cook something really healthy, or is it something treat like? And obviously, when you have kids, this is going to be probably a little bit harder, but it's an easy one that we can all kind of understand. So think about what your cues are. When you do X, Y, and Z, what is the trigger? What is the cue? Where does that behavior come from? Now, you might be shocked at what these cues are. Sometimes they're a time of day. So it could be 3 o'clock. Oh, it's 3 o'clock. I need a biscuit. Or it could be Friday night. Oh, it's Friday night. I need a treat or a takeaway or, whatever that is. Automatic patterns of behavior that have been built up over time. So, for example, if you were trying to build a new one here, you might say, okay, I'm going to put a little post-it note that lives on the bottom left of my screen Monday to Friday. And when I see that in the morning, I do my social media planning, for example. You have to install cues that will help you to build these habits or behaviors. So become more aware of your cravings, and if you think about something that you do that you're trying to change and you try to break it down into these processes, it might be easier for you to try and figure out, okay, where do I need to create a little bit of a pause here? So maybe instead of reaching for your phone, if that's your cue, you see it there, you're craving to see if someone has texted you back. You might say, oh, I recognize the craving, so I'm going to take a 2-minute break. I'm going to wander around. I'm going to make a cup of tea. You're gaining a little bit of relief, but you're not closing that loop straight away. So you're allowing yourself a little bit of space. You're essentially retraining your brain. So, what I kind of want you to understand is this is how habits form. Your brain is running through this process all the time. You're not necessarily aware of it. Your brain is a reward detector. I think we talked about this in one of the previous sessions. So your brain is always looking for positive reinforcement because its ultimate goal is survival and safety. So your sensory nervous system is always monitoring your actions for pleasure or pain. So if social media makes you feel, oh, I don't like it, I don't like being here, it's unlikely you're going to repeat that behavior because it doesn't make you feel good. So your whole nervous system is designed to avoid things that make you don't feel good. So you have to really get clear on, okay, this is where my problem is. It's not me necessarily, it's my psychological function, if you like. So, what can we do? So, this work comes from Atomic Habits. So, what James Clear says is that you can transform these 4 steps into a practical framework that you can use to either design new good habits and eliminate bad ones as well. So, the framework is called the 4 Laws of Behavior Change in the book, and it gives you a good kind of set of guidelines for creating good habits and also maybe breaking ones that you deem negative. So I'm going to show you these really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time going through each one because, again, that could be a whole hour on its own. But there's a really good resource. If you go to jamesclear.com, he's got a little table set up that gives you examples from each one of these. So I would recommend going on and having a look at that if you want to just dive a little bit deeper. But basically, how to create a good habit. So there's these 4 laws: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. So an example of the first one, make it obvious, might be something called he calls habit stacking. And BJ Fogg talked about this as well. So after A, I will do B. So something that you enjoy doing in the morning. So it could be making your first cup of tea or coffee. I will, what is that behavior that you want to stack onto that? You're more likely to do something if you group it together with something else. And you're even more likely to do it if you enjoy that first A, whatever that is. So if you're trying to implement a new strategy B, try and group it to something that you already enjoy. Makes it a little bit easier. An example of the second one, make it attractive, might be like, joining a network where this kind of growth culture is the norm. So you feel excited. We've got a lovely group of people on this call. So this is an attractive place to be when you're in this place for you want to grow, you want to be doing something for yourself. So you want to get yourself to a place where this is normal. That might be, again, like we were talking about last week, like networking events or something that you can do to put yourself in an inspiring place more often. An example of the third one, make it easy, might be priming your environment. So you have so many millions of receptors, sensory, your body's looking for sensory stimulus all of the time. Your visual stimulus is really, really important. Some scientists think up to like half of your brain is just looking for visual cues. So if you think a large part of your stimulus and cues will be based on visual input, what can you kind of put around that is going to stimulate you in a positive way? A very nice example from my life where this worked was I started to put, I've got yoga mats all over the house, and I just started to put one in every room. So I've got one in the bedroom, one in the living room, I've got loads in the garage, and I've got them kind of dotted around. So when I see them, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a little bit of stretching. If they weren't there, there's no way I'm going to go to the cupboard and go and get it out because, that just makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'm making it easier for myself because it's right there. And that works so well. Or another example of this could be, keep your, if you're working on like a business idea or you're trying to grow your social media or something like that, keep it next to your bed. So if you get a little idea, you can jot it down. Just make it easy on yourself. How can you make what you're trying to do easier? Knowing that your visual stimulus is really, really important. And the third or the fourth one, sorry, make it satisfying. So use reinforcement. So get used to rewarding yourself for small wins. And that might be a post. I put myself out there, reward yourself, give yourself a little bit of time to say, you know what, I did it. I'm proud of myself. How to break a bad habit? Essentially, you reverse these. So you make it invisible, you make it unattractive, you make it difficult, and you make it unsatisfying. So I worked with a client once on, he was trying to basically get healthier, eat less, and he had this kind of Friday night I want a pizza scenario. This is a really funny example. So what we agreed was that to try and break this habit, and this all came from, came from an emotional place because they used to have pizza as kids on a Friday night, and this was the thing. So it was really hard for him to try and break this norm. So what we said was, okay, you can have the pizza on a Friday night If you agree that you have to walk to go and get it, you have to get cash from a cash machine, and you're not allowed to take an umbrella if it's raining, something just along those kind of lines. So you're kind of making it difficult. So he agreed, put it in writing. Yeah, I agreed to do this. And it's just like, well, I don't want to go to the cash machine. I don't really want to walk down there. So no, I'm not gonna do it. I'll have something else. Once you make that binding contract with yourself, it's a little bit easier because you've set it out in advance. Now, the reason this works from a neurological perspective is because you've already practiced your response. So it's not in the moment, oh, I want a pizza, but I don't have any shopping, and that kind of, you're talking to yourself in the moment. You've already worked out what you're going to do. You've already worked out what your strategy is going to be because you've talked about it, we've spoken about it, you've got a plan in place. So it's a really interesting one. And obviously you can have a little bit of fun with this as well. In the book, there's lots of good examples of these kind of things. But essentially you want to try and reframe your mindset around, I need to make what I'm trying to cut off a little bit more difficult, and enable yourself to connect a little bit more to what you want in the process. So this make it unsatisfying. That's a good example. This fourth one to, you could buddy up with someone and make an accountability contract. I promise that I am going to XYZ. And you can do this, again, for your personal life, business life. You can use this for all aspects because you can get kids involved, you can get your partner involved, you can make it a little bit of fun because you're going to struggle to change your behavior unless you can get into the nitty-gritty of what is really going on. If you leave it to you're in that moment, it just makes it so much harder. So the planning, the preparation, doing all of this work in advance is going to give you a little bit of a head start. So again, just remember, if you want a little bit more information on this, because it's difficult to try and give you too much on each individual one, jump onto that jamesclear.com and look at his little tables where he gives you clear examples of what you can do for each one. I think that's a really good resource to have. So why are your habits so important? And especially in this context that we're talking about today. So this is something that I've held on to through all my research on habits, is again from James Clear, who stated in Atomic Habits that your identity forms through your habits. And I think I read this over and over and over again until it really sunk in. So if you're shaping who you are every day, do it deliberately, on purpose, and do it intentionally. Deliberately, purposely, intentionally. So let's spend a little bit of time and break this down a little bit. So you can see on the slide here, your identity develops through your habits and behavior. So we all have the power to shape who we are, and our identity can be changed with focus on our habits and the person we want to become. And that's really important, the person we want to become. It's a process and a gradual evolution. It's not I'm going to wake up next week and be exactly where I am. Point two, your habits are how you embody or live your identity. Now, this is also really, really important. Your habits are how you embody or live your identity. So when you repeat certain behaviors, you reinforce the identity associated with that behavior. So if you're a runner, for example, or a swimmer, or an entrepreneur, or a reader, or a mum, or whatever, your habits are how you embody that identity. So if you feel like a reader, then you don't have to force yourself to read because that's part of who you are and that's what you do. If you are a runner, it's the same thing. Or a swimmer. Yeah, I'm a swimmer. I go to the pool twice a week, 3 times a week. It doesn't feel forced because it's part of who you are. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a mum, if you're anything that aligns with this vision of yourself and you really feel that deeply, then it's going to be a little bit less work because your habits will embody that naturally. So if you are, a woman growing her own business and you really feel that deep inside that, I'm an entrepreneur, I've got these great ideas, I really want to share them, your habits will come a little bit easier because you are connected to who you are. So I want you to think about, do you really feel that, or is that something that needs to be worked on? Do you feel like this identity piece needs a little bit more in-depth discussion with yourself, for example? So an example of this would be, I'm someone who shows up for my business. It's tough, but I show up. So this could be an action of, 10 minutes a day, visibility habit on, what's going on with the business, 10 minutes a day, because you've got this identity of, I'm someone who shows up for my business. Now, point number three on here, and this is again really important. If you only seen one slide, this is it. Just think about this identity piece, because building habits is the process of becoming the real you. You are constantly changing, evolving, building new habits anyway. So if you're building these new habits anyway, the ones that last will determine the you of the future. And if you're thinking about the you of the future, I want you to think about, who do you want to become? Who do you want to become? That's really, really important. If you have a clear vision of who you want to become, you're halfway there. Now you think about, okay, I want to become the owner of a successful coffee shop, for example. Okay, what is the habits of someone in that position? What do they do? So you're kind of encouraging yourself into that role, but from an identity point of view, not from you know, uh, a more kind of action-based, goal-based place. You're doing it kind of from the inside out principle rather than the outside in. Again, there's so much more detail than this in the book, but I want you to get the general idea of, it's identity first, outcome later. If you feel like someone who can do this, you will make it happen somehow because you're capable of it, because that's who you are, that's your identity, that's what you're doing. If you're trying to open a coffee shop and it's all about, the bricks and mortar and the goals and the actions, it's a lot harder because it's not aligned with the sense of who you are. So I want you to try and think about, what identity do you want to reinforce in your business? And again, there's no right answer here. It's going to be slightly different for everyone. But what identity do you want to reinforce in your business? Try and think about it like becoming the best version of yourself. You're trying to grow and continually expand into this identity. It's not something you need to get today, but you're growing and expanding into this person. So it's about you. It's not about the the goal necessarily. This is about you as a person. So I want to challenge you to spotlight your habits a little bit. Now, this is another really interesting exercise that can make you more self-aware of what's going on day to day. So think about the things that you do every day, which are helping you, which are holding you back. Because I want to make this relevant to you. So again, take some notes. I want to encourage you to really try and challenge yourself to write down as much as you can about what you remember that you do day to day, because some people say, oh my God, I'm not sure. And you can only think of a few things. Once you get into the habit of it, even if you did it for a week and you keep expanding your list and say, oh yeah, and I do that. And oh, and also I do that, it comes more naturally. What you want to try and do is write down as much as possible and then identify which are positive, which are negative, and which are neutral. So again, you're kind of working on getting this clearer picture. So once they're identified, you can work on changing the habits. You can change what you don't know. You can change what you're not aware of. So think about what comes really easily to you. You might be on fire in the morning. You might feel like, that's a really great time to think about your business and growth and, what's next and all of that. What's a little bit more difficult? Is it the social side? Is it putting yourself out there? Is it networking? Is it selling yourself? Is it pricing? What is it? Step two of this, I want you to challenge your habits. So what do you know needs to change? It's likely that you all know something that needs to change. So what needs to change? And then what could you implement as a new, improved, healthier habit? Do you have any ideas? What could you implement that would help? And again, remember, this can be really small. Remember what BJ Fogg said, everything starts small. It can be, I think he says, as low or as little time as 30 seconds. It can start really, really small. Don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed. And then is there anything that you can let go of? So this exercise really helps you to look objectively at yourself. You're looking from the outside in. You're inviting yourself to be your own guide, your own coach, and allowing the change to happen naturally so that you don't feel forced and you don't feel rushed. Because ultimately, I want you to be able to take back control so that you can take the action that you need to. And maybe here, what might be also useful is to think about an action that aligns with the identity that you thought about in the last slide. You know, what would she do? What would that person do? You know, that question of who do I want to become? What would she do? So this little sheet might help. So you could scribble this down. It doesn't have to be fancy at all. So I think James Clear calls this something different. Um, I like to call it the habit analysis, which is literally you just write all your daily habits, as many as you can, and you just put a little X. Is it a positive one? Is it a negative one? Or is it neutral? So maybe making a cup of tea would be neutral to some, might be positive to others. If you're drinking 10 cups a day, might be negative to someone else. And it's all very personal for you. So which are positive, which are negative, which are neutral. This gives you a framework to try and understand where you can get started. You can't change something until you can see it really clearly. So this is always where I ask people to start. Just take away all of the judgment, any criticism of yourself. This is not for anyone else to see but you, and gain some clarity on where you're at. Analyze your current habits and see where you are. You know, that question that people always ask of how long does it take to build a habit? You'll see all types of answers. The truth is, no one really knows exactly, but some people say 21 days, 30 days, 100 days. There's a popular answer right now that says 66 days because there was one study that found on average it took 66 days. So that's just something to know. But even within that one study, the range was quite wide. So it depends on context and difficulty of the habit and all of that. But I understand from speaking to people on this that people want to know how long until it's easy, you know, how long until it doesn't feel like work anymore. And, you know, habits will, of course, get easier with practice, but the honest answer is forever, because once you stop doing it, then it's no longer a habit. So think about habits as a lifestyle to be lived and not a finish line to be crossed. So habits are a lifestyle. The way you want to become this person that you want to become is through these lifestyle changes. So you want to kind of take away the finish line for yourself. I think that really helps. And just start small, sustainable changes, something that you can stick with for years. So if you maybe have this idea that, you know, you should become a runner, which is always a really easy one to talk about. If you hate running and it doesn't feel aligned with who you are, well, you're not going to keep that up. So don't do it to yourself. Just let that go and focus on something that you like yoga or Pilates or swimming or whatever. And you know, the same applies to your business. This has to be something that you're going to stick to for years. So habits become a little bit of a toolbox in the sense of you can ask yourself, how am I using them? This idea of habit formation, positive habit formation, is a long-term situation. You know, it often takes time for the progress to really be felt, but once you feel it and it's embedded, it becomes part of who you are. And consistency is really important as well. So, and also the element of being human, which we'll come back to. But I wanted to spotlight this, which I think sums it up really lovely. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. This is one reason why meaningful change does not require radical change. Small habits can make a meaningful difference by providing evidence of a new identity. And if a change is meaningful, it's actually big. So that's the paradox of making small improvements. It all comes back to this idea of small, meaningful change that is connected to the idea of who you are and who you are becoming. So I wanted to get a little bit practical on this, in the sense of, okay, how can we use some of this knowledge? So here are some examples I want you to consider as you think about habits in relation to your business life or your personal self. So think about this again as a long-term strategy. Only you will know what's helpful for you, but see if this kind of sparks any thoughts or ideas for you personally. So, are you making yourself visible regularly? Are you putting yourself out there? Are you consistent with your message or marketing or services? I didn't put it in here, but also your pricing, because that's one that comes up again and again. Are you following up or engaging with your potential clients? Something I always tell people as well is, are you engaging with your past clients? And people will say things like, oh no, I don't want to bother them. But they've already came to you, so what's holding you back from reaching out with a new program, a new offer, a new something? How is your current routine helping you move forward? So if you think about what do you do on a daily basis, how is that helping you move forward? Because it might be, which is great. So that might, be something that you can celebrate, or you might be able to identify how it's holding you back. So is your current routine holding you back, and how? I also love this idea of scheduling CEO time. So you're the CEO of your business, potentially, certainly your life. Sometimes I always tell moms they're the CEO of their families because it's true. But can you schedule this CEO time if you were the most important person in your life, personal, work life, whatever that is, family life? Schedule the time to really think it through and gain the clarity that you need. You're not going to really be able to make progress that matters to you without clarity. So can you schedule even a Friday is always a really good day for this. So if you schedule half an hour of CEO time for yourself on a Friday, think about the week. What did you achieve? What do you want to think about for next week? And really allow yourself time to bring it all together. Review your habits continually. What I'm kind of hoping is now that you think about habits a little bit differently, this is how you're embodying who you are. This is really, really important. So now that you know that, think about it as often as you can remember. Am I doing that for um am I doing that for a reason, or am I doing that because it's unconscious automatic pilot? And think about your actions as often as you can. Now, you're not going to remember all of the time, but as often as you remember. And also, what habits would help you right now? What habits would help you based on where you're at right now? So I hope that gives you a little bit of food for thought. I also wanted to touch a little bit on the human side, because you're all just human and you cannot stick to positive habits all the time. It's not realistic. So normalize this disruption that you will face and prepare yourself for setbacks, for the ability to bounce back, and for like a continual reboot that I call it. So try to manage your own expectations of what's possible. And please remember, don't beat yourself up when things get in the way. So I've put just a few examples here. There's many more, but examples like stress or anxiety can get in the way. A lack of a strong why I'm doing this in the first place. You can lose that easily along the way, but you have to connect back to, why am I doing this in the first place? Inconsistency is up there. You know, you miss it for a couple of days before you know it, a week's gone by and you haven't thought about it. I see you nodding, Kirsty. Yeah. A lack of connection to yourself. If you're not connected to yourself, then it just doesn't have the same power. You're powerful beyond measure, but if you're not connected to yourself, then you don't feel it. Distraction and a lack of focus. If, you know, there's 100 things going on at once, of course, you're not going to be able to keep things up the way that you would like. And life variables, we don't talk about this enough. You know, when the children are sick, or your parent has a fall, or, you know, the cat is getting an operation, or, you know, whatever, there's going to be stuff that happens in life that's out of your control. That is not your fault. That's just life. And if you kind of prepare yourself for that in advance, you can say, oh, okay, yeah, this is just something that I need to overcome. It's absolutely fine. Don't beat yourself up. So when you're trying to reboot, as I call it, then don't rely on willpower. Redesign your environment. Take a little bit of inspiration from what Wendy Wood was talking about with your environment is part of how you live out your identity. So how can you change that up for yourself to help yourself? Notice your triggers. Think about that habit loop and notice when behaviors pop up that you're not so happy with and try and identify what that cue is. James Clear always says never miss twice. So if you miss it on one day, see if you can jump back straight in the next day. It just eliminates that process of taking a break and refocus on who you're becoming. That's one I personally always come back to. Refocus on who you are becoming to streamline yourself back in the direction that you're moving. I also wanted to give you this little exercise, which I love, and we don't really have time to go through it in detail, but maybe you guys can check it out and maybe we could talk about it on another day. But this is called WHOOP. So it's a scientifically validated exercise. So this is Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen, I think it's pronounced. So basically what she did was she was trying to figure out a way to turn dreams into action by combining visualization with realistic planning. So it's a four-step process. You've got wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. And it goes further basically than positive thinking or, you know, I would love to be able to do X, Y, and Z because it asks you to confront the potential obstacles before they happen. So you're better prepared to try and succeed. So if we were to do this together, you would basically say, okay, what do you want to create in your life? What's the wish? Think of something that feels exciting, challenging, but also feasible. You know, that's important. If you were going to say, I want to go to the moon, then I'd say, well, we probably need to rethink that. But this has to be something feasible that's possible in your life. And also try and make it succinct. So can you describe it in 3 to 6 words? Then you kind of try to visualize the best possible result. So what will it feel like and why does it matter? What does it feel like and why does it matter? What's the benefit that you would get? Then you think about the obstacle. So what's the main obstacle that could get in your way? So it could be a thought, a habit, an emotion, like a real life circumstance. You can, if we were doing this properly, you know, this takes a long time. You can write as many obstacles as you want, but the key here then is to come back to what's the primary one? What's that primary obstacle and blocker? And then lastly, you make a plan. So you make a plan for handling that obstacle when it comes up. So, for example, if I feel self-doubt, then I'll remind myself of my identity and why I'm doing this. So you can use it consistently, whether you're forming a new habit or you're facing some kind of internal resistance. But it works because it's integrating your mindset with behavior and it's turning kind of vague hopes into actionable plans. So maybe you could do a little bit more reading on that too. If you Google it, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So a little habit challenge for you. When we're all together, when we've got this collective energy, I want to ask you, what is one small habit I'm ready to commit to this week? So it'll be 2 weeks before we're back at our next session. So even if we make that 2 weeks, what's one small habit I'm ready to commit to? And then ask yourself, what identity does it reinforce? What personal identity for you? Remember, it'll be different for everyone, and that's okay. CEO time, I love it. It's such a good one. I do that personally every Friday. Yeah. It's the reflection and the planning. It's really, really important. We don't give ourselves that time. Oh, Karen, I am important. I love it. And it's important to write these down. I think you're making that contract with yourself. So I wanted to give you just this slide. The slides will be shared, of course, as well in the recording. But just if you do want to do a little bit more reading, here's some resources that I would recommend. And I thought this was interesting because going from ancient wisdom from Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Now, we're trying to still solve this problem thousands of years later, and this kind of timeless quote reminds us that success isn't about the one big moment, it's the small choices that we make every day. And obviously, you're all here, you've all turned up again, and I think that that speaks volumes. So it's just about keeping this momentum going and asking yourself what's next.